Once you've found the root bridge within the topology, it's time to find the root ports. So what are root ports? Well, these are ports that you will only find on non-root bridges. You will not find root ports on the root bridge. So we know where our focus is going to be. It's going to be on these other three switches in this topology that are not the root bridge. And it's important to realize that the non-root bridges can only have one root port, which means that in this topology, we only have to find three total root ports. One for this switch, one for this switch, and one for this switch. Meaning you can check your work as you go along with spanning tree protocol. So what is our root port? Well, it's going to be a port on the non-root bridge with the lowest cost path to get back to the root bridge. So when you compare these two interfaces or these two ports on this switch, which one is closer to the root bridge? Now, it's not based on physical closeness. It's based on what? What is it based on? Cost. So we have to identify the cost of these various links in the topology. Notice there's no speed listed, and cost is inversely proportional to speed. 10 gig is a cost of 2, 1 gig is a cost of 4, 100 meg is a cost of 19, and 10 meg is a cost of 100. Well, I don't see any cost listed in the topology, and I don't see any interface or link speeds. What that means is that we just treat them as equal with any value we want to give them. So don't let that hold you back. If you're ever looking at a topology as such, and it's not on real equipment, then don't panic. You define your own costs. Let's just give all of these a cost of 2 for fun. Because we're not going to let that hold us back from identifying our topology, are we? So all of these have a cost of 2. So we're pretending they're gig links. Or, pardon me, 10 gig links. So we said that root port, lowest cost path back to the root bridge. So if we focus on our switch in the upper right, which of these two paths is quicker? Which of these two paths is quicker? Well, with the costs on screen, the green path has a cost of 2, whereas the red path has a total cost of 6. So which path is quicker? It's the path using port 1. Therefore, port 1 is our root port. Root port. Remembering that this is our root bridge. We do the same thing on our switch in the lower left-hand corner. Is it quicker to get to the root bridge using port 1, or is it quicker to use port 2? Well, if we use port 1, we have a total cost of 2. If we go the other way, we have a total cost of 2, 4, 6. 6 is greater than 2. We always want lower with spanning tree protocol, so therefore port 1 is our root port. And what about our last switch right here? Let's examine this. Let's take the green path this way, and let's analyze the red path this way. Folks, which path is quicker? The path through port 1 or the path through port 2? Did you say tied? I hope you're saying tied. Because the green path has a total cost of 4, and the red path has a total cost of 4. Therefore, we have a tie. And remember, with spanning tree protocol, higher is better. Or pardon me, whoa, no. Lower is better, and ties are not acceptable. So we have to break a tie. So what have we examined so far? We have examined cost. But in this case, cost is tied. So since cost is tied, what can we use to break the tiebreaker? We can look for the lower sending bridge ID. Lower sending bridge ID. So, according to this switch, it has received a BPDU from this switch. It has received a BPDU from this switch. They were both advertising a cost of 2 to get to the root bridge, and then when this switch added its costs to get to them, the cost ended up being tied at 4. Within the bridge protocol data unit is the sending bridges or sending switches bridge ID. So now this switch looks at the bridge IDs and the BPDUs that were received. And in this case, the BPDU received from this switch has that information in it, and from this switch has that information in it. So now we compare the bridge ID of those two switches. And according to this topology, priority's tied. So therefore, we now have to look at the MAC address to break the tiebreaker. And when I look at the MAC address, I see 00001111. So it's a tie for the very first 8 hexadecimal values. But after that, what do we see? We see a 2 and we see a 3. 2 is lower than 3. Therefore, the best path to take in this case would be using port 2. Because it's the more preferred path based on the decision-making process. So let's label that as the root port. So we've determined the root ports in this topology. The first 2 are relatively simple. This one and this one. Cost was used to determine that. But for this port, cost was tied. And since cost was tied, we had to go to the next step in the decision-making process, and that was by looking at the bridge ID from the sending devices within the BPDU. And our switch determined that the best way to go was through port number 2, in this case, out towards the switch. This one right here. Now, what is the state of these root ports? They're in the forwarding state, meaning that they will forward frames, receive frames. They will also be utilized during the learning process and populate the MAC address table. So when frames come in on an interface, you look at the source MAC address, populate the MAC address table. Well, root ports, being in the forwarding state, will learn MAC addresses as well.